Okay, it must be time. Ooh, why is that lamp so close? Anyway, it must be time for a live stream because it's 8 o'clock and therefore I go live every day. Thank you everyone who tunes into these. Always a pleasure, never a chore. Always fun to do these kind of live streams. And tonight I'm talking about regionality in Scotch whisky. So this is a really interesting. No, I'm going to rephrase that. I'm talking about regionality in Australia. Now there's two sides to that I want to touch on, but it includes regionality on Scotch whisky as part of that discussion. So Hot Dog Extravaganza, Whiskey Saurus, J Hodes, Dram, Gengoidal, Real Talk. Yes, thanks, Geng. Thanks for being part of Real Talk with Matt Bailey. No, it's not called Real Talk. It's just called Live at 8. And where I answer your questions in some streams, we take on an interesting or challenging topic in other streams, and we have a bit of fun with it. That's what these streams are about, and I really love delving into some of the crazier or more challenging topics, and sometimes the beginner stuff as well. Sometimes discussing some of the basics of whiskey, some of the enjoyment of whiskey, discovery of flavour, all those kind of things all together. Mount Slide Distilling Co. joined. Good to see you. 45 Finn, Jamie Pooh's 1985, Mr. Den 15. I'm talking about regionality in Australia. Now, I'm talking about Australian whiskey, but I'm also talking about regionality of culture as well. Now, I want to preface this by talking about some regionality in Scotch whisky. When you look at a bottle of Scotch whisky, I'm going to use the Society as an example, as you're on the Society stream. It has on there region. And I'll hold that up. If you can see that, it says region, Speyside in this case. Nick Husek, Sable Scotch, Gengoidal, good for you, mate. Look, I don't know if the camera's picking up on that. It's a little bit far for me to reach entirely all the way there, but it says region, Speyside. For those who are Society members, you'll know this already. We print the region on the bottle. This is a 20-year-old whiskey called Ruby Booze Day. Lovely whiskey, that one. 46.69, Oldham Dignified. Lovely whiskey. Now, Rum Fanta joined. Good to see you. We print the region on the bottle. Speyside, Highland, Isla, Islands, Campbelltown. It's all on the bottle there, so you know which region that whiskey's come from. I'm going to be straight up with you right now. I think regionality as a benchmark or as a discussion point in Scotch whisky is mostly null and is a new thing, historically speaking, as well. So if you rewind 50 years in Scotch whisky, or even 30 years in Scotch whisky, regions were not discussed as part of the whiskey. It was quite a marketing trick to get that into play, add a sort of a local flair into each area, that they all produce a different style of whiskey in each of those areas. Yes, they do produce different styles of whiskies in different regions of Scotland. Lowland whiskey is quite different from Campbelltown whiskey. Isla whiskey is quite different from most Speyside whiskey. And I'm not going to say that they're all the same, because that's ridiculous. That's a ridiculous comment. But what I'm trying to make point of tonight is that regionality in Scotch whisky as a discussion point, and especially more and more, is completely null and void. It doesn't mean anything anymore. And that's, I think, a really good thing, because I think talking about regionality just further pigeonholes a subject of great whisky and doesn't actually provide any context to what you're enjoying or drinking. Let me use a prime example of the two empties that are sitting in front of me here. We use both of these whiskies at events, and I have the empty bottles here. Okay, here we have a 66.145 from the Highlands in Scotland, and we have a 10.167 from Isla in Scotland. You normally associate Highland whiskey with light, floral, heathery kind of spirit, and you normally associate Isla whiskey with peated, smoky, iodine whiskey. In this case, the roles are completely reversed between these two bottles. This is a peated whiskey. This 66 is from the Highlands. Was a peated whiskey. It's finished now, as you can see. It was a 21-year-old peated whiskey. So a Highland distillery that exclusively runs peated whiskey. What do you make of that? There you go. There's your first problem with talking about regionality. What does it mean in terms of flavour? It doesn't mean anything in terms of flavour. It means it's like it's from the region it's from. What if I just say it's Scotch whisky? It's from Scotland. And here we have 10.167, an Isla whiskey distillery, one of the 9 or 10 distilleries in Isla. I have to check my stats, it's always changing. 10.167. 59.5% Islay whiskey, unpeated Islay whiskey. No peat was used, well, very, 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 very minimal peat was used in the distillation of this spirit, so therefore it shouldn't have any smoke or peat in it. It does have a sort of coastal element to it still. That's picking up the elements of terroir and the regionality of, I guess, of that spirit, but it's not talking about region alone as a talking point. It doesn't seem to provide me any context to what it's going to taste like. If someone said to me, that they only love their Islay whiskies, they love their big peated Islay whiskies, it's like, great. If I then told them to try this, they'd be very disappointed. Just same with if someone says they love their soft, heathery, buttery kind of Highland whiskies, then I tell them to try that, they're going to be like, oh, what's all this smoke and peat? They're not going to enjoy it. Caribbean Whiskey Drinker asks, quick question about membership. If you refer a new member, do you still get a gathering pack as a bonus? Caribbean Whiskey Drinker, not at the moment. That was a promotion running that finished in December. However, we've got a new promotion starting up this week, which each promotion normally kicks off on Outturn Day. So Outturn Day onwards, we normally kick off a new promotion. Each one goes for about a month and a half each time, and then the next one starts the following 2 months Outturn later. So no, sorry, Caribbean Whiskey Drinker, we don't currently have that. But I'll tell you what, I'll do you a deal. Get them to use the word autumn, AUTUMN, at the checkout, and they'll get 25 off their membership for the first year. And look, I'll throw you a voucher as well for referring them. Get them to put your name in the referral column. I'll look after you. Don't worry, Caribbean Whiskey Drinker. Maybe we use flavor profile to classify whiskey. Classification could be useful there. Like I say, I don't find regionality a very useful discussion in these kinds of things. That's all. That's my 2 cents on that. But the real discussion point tonight was talking about regionality in Australia. And I don't just mean the spirit, I mean the culture. Just last week, on Thursday, Friday night, I was asked to host a group of members in Melbourne as part of Unfiltered Magazine, a special article for Unfiltered Magazine coming up. I can't tell you too much about it at the moment, but we talked a bit about how the Melbourne whiskey scene is quite different from other cities in Australia. And this whiskey scene and how it's evolved in different ways, and how I would argue that the Melbourne whiskey scene is a bit more vibrant and a bit more is a bit bigger in Melbourne. The whiskey scene is a bit bigger in Melbourne than it is in Sydney. And why is that? And we were discussing how these things happened, what that means to the scene there. But maybe think about regionality. Maybe think about not just in spirit production, which I'll get to, but talking more about how different bars, different people, the people that run these bars, the people that run restaurants, the whiskey scene in general, how it evolves in each city. And I'd love your thoughts on this as well in this video. So if it's sort of something like, if you have a sort of a city where the strength of that city in the whiskey scene is determined by just the bars, or what else is it? I think it's often determined by great bottle shops, great experiences. I think a lot of it bears down to the events and experiences. And I think I would argue that our events and experiences in Melbourne and Sydney are pretty much bang on. We do a little bit less events only marginally less, but in Adelaide, Brisbane, Canberra, Perth, etc., Hobart. But, there's all sorts of things always going on. But I'd say those 2 big cities, Sydney and Melbourne, where I live in Sydney, but in Melbourne, the scene there is quite a bit different. And I'd love to know why that is, why that scene changes and how it's changed. But the same goes for spirit. This is really this live stream tonight's more me asking some questions really and seeing what the feedback is. But so I can probably spread out these topics a bit more over the next few nights. But the next one would be regionality of Australian whiskey. Now, I'm seeing this starting to happen already. Obviously, the main 2 that you see in Australia already in terms of regions, maybe even 3. I'd almost say 3, but main 2 at the moment are mainland whiskey and Tasmanian whiskey. And they're actually quite far apart when it comes to the discussion. People often say, is that a mainland whiskey or is that a Tasmanian whiskey? And again, my response is, why does it matter? What does that tell me about this, or tell me about it, or how does it taste? I'd argue it doesn't tell you much at all. And do you enjoy it? Is it in your glass, and do you enjoy it? I'd say that's a much more productive discussion in some ways. So let me grab some of these comments. Lots of comments coming through. Caribbean Whiskey Drinks, already joined on the weekend, thanks mate. Look, Caribbean Whiskey Drinker, I'll help you out however I can. Can the regional whiskey histories have an impact on flavour, style, quality of spirit in Australia? Ooh, whiskey stein's a really good question. So can the regional whiskey histories have an impact on flavour / style / quality of spirit in Australia? I'd argue not on quality, no. I mean, because quality is always constantly improving, constantly being rejigged, and it moves much faster than the rest of the trade. In terms of flavour and style, I'd say maybe. I mean, maybe regionality in Australia does have an impact on that. I mean, in mainland Australia, there was a long history of rum production, of whiskey production, a lot of it very bad, a lot of it very cheap, nasty spirit that catered for that 1800s audience. You know what I find fascinating about Australian whiskey, actually? One of my favourite little stats about it is that the first known record of a distillery opening in Australia was 1822. 1822. Like, first settlement, like James Cook and all that, was 1788. So it only took us only a few decades to sort of get our act together and get a distillery open. So 1822 is 2 years before Glenlivet, and their Glenlivet slogan was the distillery that started it all was their slogan for years. I don't know if it still is, but the Glenlivet slogan was the distillery that started it all, Glenlivet. And that's why I think it's hilarious that it's the distillery that started it all. But even Australia had a distillery 2 years before Glenlivet. Now, but there was a lot more a lot cruder here that was being produced. I'm guessing access to certain wood, and back then was non-existent. But what was happening was probably a much different beast from what is happening today. Has the new unfiltered been posted out yet? I saw it on the website, but we'd rather read paper copy. It should be in your mailboxes today or tomorrow, J-Hodes. We're really hoping. We've been working in the mail house here in Sydney to make sure that everyone gets their copies in time. Everyone's getting their copies of Unfiltered. Don't worry, because we're nuts in Melbourne. Yeah, Whiskey Juzma, you're not wrong. Like, there's a certain. I mean that in the nicest way, but there's a certain fever for good whiskey bars and good whiskey events in Melbourne. And my question really is about: do you reckon that regionality in the spirit production changes it in Australia? Because at the moment we're classified by mainland and Tasmania. Maybe we need a further classification. Maybe we need. If people still believe in regionality, that is. I particularly don't, as I'm saying. There's only two things I've really come out against on these live streams, and one of them was infinity bottles, and the other one was regionality. I find them both a bit redundant. I would say that region now, J-Hode says, I'd say that a region now just means a majority of those spirits taste like ... Anywhere can make whiskey taste like anywhere. Anything, sorry. Anywhere can make whiskey that tastes like anything, but regions definitely form a reputation. There you go, reputational. That's all it is. It's reputational in terms of if you say peated whiskey from the Highlands, like a peated whiskey from Distillery 66, some people might think that it's inferior or it's not as good, and I'd say that's completely bunk. It's completely nonsense. To have a 21-year-old single cask peated whiskey from the Highlands is a lot of fun, I think, and I think you'd be paying 3 times that for a 21-year-old peated whiskey out of Islay, because it has that sort of mysticism of the island and the spirit and the different types of peat used as well, of course. But I think it's a little bit unjustified, if I'm being honest. Insane the amount of events in March. Yeah, there's a lot going on in March. Check out our website, smws.com.au/events. We do more events. I was thinking about this earlier today because there's this events listing page I saw. We do more events, whiskey events in Australia than any other whiskey company or any other whiskey club, any other independent bottler, anything. We generally do, depending on private events and corporate bookings and whatnot, and including all the public events, activations, and member nights. We're looking at anywhere between 12 to 15 events a month, which is massive. I love what we do, though. Mr. Coconut 8 joined. Talk Whiskey to Me joined. Malta Fisher joined. I guess region. Yeah, okay. I mean, would this temperature in Australia regions make a difference to the spirit in the barrel? Ooh, yes, absolutely 45 fin. The answer to that is yes, and unequivocally yes. That's why whiskey made in, arguably, and I don't want to get in too much trouble for saying this, but whiskey made in Tasmania is markedly better than whiskey made in Queensland. The hotter the climate, the faster the spirit interacts with the wood, and if you're still maintaining those minimum aging times and small cask regime going on, you're going to end up with a much hotter spirit the further north you go. There are a lot of distillers and a lot of bottlers who believe that as well. That's not just my opinion. It's that the colder the climate, the better for slower maturation over a longer period of time. So yes, You can have Glenlivet. No, you guys have got Glenlivet, Malt Official. Over in Scotland have got Glenlivet. We've got much different distilleries over here. I would guess, Sable Scotcher says, I guess region would only be relevant if the peat barley water was sourced exclusively from the area, and that doesn't happen in totality. Very good point, Sable Scotch, but at the same time, that sort of raises that question about what makes an Australian whiskey, what makes a Scotch whiskey, what makes an American whiskey. Does it all have to be from the one region or from the nearest 100-mile radius or something like that to be considered that? What if good examples of this, certain Japanese and Indian whiskies that source their peat from different countries, their barley from another country, their water even shipped in from different places to make the spirit in that country. It seems like a bit sort of counterintuitive, but it's still often called Japanese whiskey or still called Indian whiskey. Caribbean Whiskey says, would whiskey production region be better in the regions that produce world-class wines? No, I don't think so, Caribbean Whiskey Drinker. I don't think that's really a thing. I mean, the wine is obviously a lot more dependent on the grading of the soil and the vines and the climate. But I think in whiskey production levels, it has a lot more to do with the core ingredients, of course, like the barley, the yeast, and then the water. And I say that deliberately in that order, rather than the obviously anything purely organic on the grounds of the vineyard, organically grown in the vineyard, I should say. I mean, there might be some merit to that, but I doubt it. Whiskey Stan says, does the Melbourne/Sydney whiskey culture have to do with the free settler/penal divide that people say has fostered different attitudes towards culture/arts and possibly food cultures? Wow. Whiskey Stan's, I'm going to go with yes. I think there is a bit of a Melbourne-Sydney whiskey divide. I don't think so when it comes into distilleries so much. I mean, there's big and little distilleries in both New South Wales and Victoria. Starwood would be the king hit over in Victoria. Archie Rose would be the king hit here, in terms of capacity and size and reputation. But it's sort of, I don't really think it's so much to do with the distilleries. I think it has a lot to do with the bars and nightlife and culture and how it's very different between the two cities. I've always said that Sydney's just that little bit more concerned with being, it's about what you're seen drinking rather than what you're actually enjoying drinking, and more about the image, very image conscious city, and that's fine. That's the way it is. It's probably a bit like comparing. No, I don't even know how to make that comparison. Doesn't matter. I was trying to compare. No, if I even say it, I'll get in trouble. There you go. One isn't better than the other. There's different focuses. Yeah, it's true. That's what I mean. They're very different, and the focus is very different. The drinking culture is very different, and I think that's almost like a bar regionality and a nightlife regionality rather than a distillery one. Those ones. Yeah, regionality has been erased by centralisation in Scotland, Malt Official says. It's now merely just for tourists. Yeah, I mean, that's fine. And I've got no problem with that, Malt Official. If it provides an outlet for the tourism industry to sell Scotch whisky, then that's fine. I think it's just I think in terms of talking about it, in terms of a flavour and output level, I think it's mostly redundant. And sometimes, yes, I would argue that certain whiskies taste like the region they're made in. And when you're drinking a Campbelltown whiskey, if you're sitting along the bank there, along the pier in Campbelltown, drinking in Glen Scotia, it sort of tastes like, or a Springbank or whatever it is, it tastes like that area that you're in. It has a certain sense of place to it. I'm not going to completely erase the idea of terroir, but I'm going to say that regionality in terms of a discussion point in itself is mostly redundant. Whiskey Jusma says, look, probably where the whiskey is matured is the influence with regards to climate. I think that's one of the defining regional influences. I'd agree. Yeah, exactly. Where it's matured rather than where it's distilled, I think is far more important in whiskey. That where it's distilled is like if we're talking about where it's distilled versus where it's matured versus where it's where the ingredients come from. Where it's distilled is the least important. That's that's the least important factor to determining the flavour of the end product. Where it's matured and what the ingredients are used to create that spirit are the most important. I like my infinity bottle, Matt. Yeah, sorry. Look, some of them are really good, J-Hodes. Some of them are really good. You can get nice infinity bottles if you get the formula right, but I never do. Well, and I always find they're either boring or one-dimensional or just... I never reach for them. That was my point. You can watch that video up on our YouTube. It was a stream from about 2 or 3 weeks ago. It was good fun. J-Herd says, my process is pour one as soon as I open the bottle. not necessarily peated in there. There's the only thing that doesn't go in. Yeah, if you put any peat in an infinity bottle, it turns it into a peated whiskey straight away. All the nuances might be gone. Kahlila spirit is shipped off the island as soon as possible to mature. That is correct. There's no Kahlila maturing in Isla, as far as I know. I don't think there's any casks, apart from maybe a few tourist casks and whatnot. Maybe a few private barrels owned by the distillery or something on site. Maybe a few experiments, but otherwise, I don't think there's anything. I don't think there's any Kahlila matured in Isla anymore. It is all shipped off. That's right. Yet Kahlila is, I would argue, when it's unpeated Kahlila, is it's almost mirrors that of a. It's obviously used a bit of peat in it, but it mirrors that of a good Highland whiskey anyway. So as I say, it's where its maturity is important, but the climate across Scotland, it does get a little bit colder in Isla, but not really that much. I mean, across Scotland, it's just bloody cold a lot of the year, and then it's a bit warm in the middle. Dancing a duet. Oh, mate. Yeah, I was going to ask, what are people drinking tonight? I poured a little bit of something earlier here, which was something from the shelf. Ah, that's right. 29.255, I think the code was. No, 250, sorry. Bit of an earlier code from Distillery 29. Speaking of regionality, that one's straight from Scotland. If I try and balance this glass, I will smash it live on the live stream, and I don't want to do that. But it looks cool. Anyway. I felt like something peated tonight. Yeah, so that's where I'm up to at the moment, and that was sort of my Party Fizz. Petrito. I remember Party Fizz. 54.55, 54.54, something like that with the code was Party Fizz. Fantastic whiskey, hugely underrated. One of those casks that I think it was like a 10 or 9 or an 11-year-old from Distillery 54, a classic Speyside distillery starting with A, and it was one of those whiskeys that was basically like sherbet candy in a glass. It was delicious. It was a lovely unpeated number from that distillery. Not that distillery does any peated runs. Anyway, I don't know why I said that. .66, there you go. .66. I'm still kicking myself for not grabbing one of those. I always say that there's lots of casks that come and go, and I go, would have been good to get that. Would have been good to get that. Oh well, win some, lose some. Ben React 10 for me, quite tasty. Still waiting for my first SMWS to arrive in the mail. Oh, J-Herds has not arrived yet. Okay, we are having some slight delays with some orders because of the new company, as we would have seen in the emails. We have to go through a new bonded warehouse arrangement. I don't want to bore you to tears with all the ATO nonsense that we've been going through, but I mean, I love you, the ATO. I love the ATO, but there is some slight hiccups on shipping at the moment, and we do apologise. We'll get them out to you as soon as possible, J-Herds. I'm very sorry. Banging. That's great. Actually, it was a friend of mine last night who said to me, that's a word I constantly say when I'm enjoying a whiskey. That's banging. That's really good. So I can take that. I can take that one. Would have only gone through on Monday. Don't worry. Okay. Well, we're getting there. We're getting there. Glenn Farkas 105. Good to see you, Whiskey Juice, mate. Good. Always 105 is always a trustworthy staple of the sherried whiskey cabinet. Lovely. How about that? Ooh, it's zesty. It shouldn't be zesty, not zesty so much. It's just it's got a bit of a packs a bit of a punch. That's what good whiskey should do, though. Should excite you. Should take you by surprise. You know what? Actually, I'm gonna delve more into regionality as a discussion point over the next few days. I think because I think there's a lot more to delve into here, especially when it comes to regionality in Australia. When it comes to who enjoys it, how we enjoy it, and how whiskey's made and how it's made differently in different regions that might contribute to that flavour as well. Yeah, so look, that's where I'm up to tonight. I really appreciate you tuning in as always. Every night I do a live stream here, and I have done for about the last year now, which has been so much fun, or a little bit under a year, about 9 months. And I really appreciate you tuning in, having a chat to me about great whiskey, and learning a few things along the way. Always appreciate your questions and comments that have been coming through. Fantastic as always. Love it. I'll be back on tomorrow night, which will be our Thursday night live stream. And in the meantime, have a wonderful evening, and I'll see you all tomorrow. If you want to catch up on old episodes of the live stream and learn a few things along the way, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, SMWS Australia. Hit the little subscribe and little bell icon. Really appreciate it. The more we can do on there is great, because then we can do more live streams in there as well for the big tastings that are coming up later this year. And I'll, like I said, appreciate you tuning in, and I'll see you all tomorrow. Cheers.